are in listen-only mode.
Okay, I just want to test the sound. So, Joy, I think I have everything from you.
You should just have one thing from me, just the final PowerPoint.
Yep. I'm going to minimize you for just a second. I've run through the PowerPoint a couple of times.
And then you should have just gotten an email from me that breaks out minute by minute.
Yes, I have that. Yes, I have that.
And I thought that would just be useful for you to have a key that says, here's what I should do next. Given that's what that just happened, and so I should be doing this next.
Okay, I got it.
Nice to see you, Liz.
Hi, do you have a headset, Joy? Because there's quite a bit of echo for you. It's so much better when on these things, I think, sometimes to have a headset for this when there's so many people listening.
Yeah, it cuts down on the reverb and the weird sounds in the background.
I'll work on the ear infection for you.
Oh, I don't want you to have an ear infection. I just want people to be able to hear clearly what everybody's saying, you know.
I know.
Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay.
And it appears that you can see us both. Is that correct, Deborah?
Yes.
Great.
Liz, you might want to shift yours so that they're looking less at your ceiling. You got a really cool thing on your ceiling.
I know. It's because, as Deborah knows, the Global Fund laptops have the cameras in the most awkward spot, in the lower left-hand corner. So everybody has a triple chin. It's true, right, Deborah? It's like a thing.
It looks like I mean, you just really have to be looking up at the ceiling in order to really look good with that camera.
It's terrible. So.
Well, I think you look great. So, and your ceiling looks great as well.
I'm going to change out this. I'm thinking of changing out this fixture because it looks like I have a halo sometimes.
So, can you guys hear me clearly? Because now I'm just checking my headphone.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really good. It's much better.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you guys are super loud now. Trying to figure out. I tried to change it on my.
You can do it on your keyboard. Just turn it down, right?
No, I've been trying to do that, remarkably enough.
We can whisper.
Oh, that was the thing I liked about Sweden. That was my big discovery, is that they whisper more there. I went to the hotel breakfasts where you're just kind of sitting and getting ready for your day. And I didn't have a meeting till noon. And so I sat and they whispered the whole time. I thought, I want to live in a country where everybody whispers. We have so much work done.
If you find that place, phone me.
I'm telling you, Sweden. They whisper in Sweden.
So, Deborah, I don't know if you have the actual PowerPoint or you're using some sort of PDF, but I do notice that the year is wrong on the first slide.
Yeah, this is not mine. So this is what Joy sent us.
Can you change it to 2017, or do you not have the PowerPoint itself?
Hold on just a second. I need to.
Just because it's a little weird, like living in the past here. It did take us a whole year to do this project, so I see where you're coming from.
I can't. No, hold on just a second. I need to get.
You should be able to exit presentation. You just need to exit presentation and then.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll go back one slide. There. Now you should be able to. Ooh, 2 sevens. Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay.
And Liz, T and I walked through this last week. Do you have any thoughts on the agenda that we put together?
No, I just wanted to ask you if you had any. I mean, you have me doing a little bit of a wrap up in slide 12. Obviously, I can do slide 8, no problem. And the question would be, how do I do it in 5 minutes? But I will just give the highest level, obviously. In terms of 12, in terms of this wrap up and how it fits into gender lens investing, if it hasn't already been said, what I will say is that, lots of stakeholders and constituents assume that women's funds are expert in this area, and that's, as in the immortal words of Marissa Wesley, I don't know if I'll quote her or not, but, it's a good thing that people think we're expert as women's funds in this area. And so there is not a lot of choice but to be involved. But I don't know if that's what you had in mind or you had something else in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the in the ways that we restructured the report, we really don't frame this, and I'm actually going to not frame it in the beginning in terms of the history of gender lens investing, like the whole report. We really don't talk about gender lens investing until the last slide.
Okay.
And so you might actually start with, there is a field and there's some cool people in it and we could work with them. And we're needed in the field. I think this is the point that also says there's a field available, and not only women's funds, you know, in many ways already there, but really, really needed to make sure this field stays on course.
Okay. Let's see where it goes and like what seems appropriate, because there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then.
Exactly. No, but that's the general point, and the takeaways. We did all the criticism of the field and its issues with intersectionality and how it's doesn't really do great gender analysis sometimes.
Right.
We put all of that at the end, and sort of focused on what women's funds could do, as opposed to saying all this stuff.
Hey everybody, can you see me?
No, but we can hear you.
We can hear you. Wow, Teresa, are you on your cell phone?
No, I'm on my, do I need to put my headphones in?
Yeah, it would be a lot better if you did that. Thank you so much.
So we have all three of our presenters here in the back of Teresa's chair.
And you know, Teresa's got some leopard going on there.
Yeah.
And you're showing a great PowerPoint now, Deborah. I like that PowerPoint.
This is having worked with Deborah for a long time. This is her screensaver, and it's amazing. Amazing. Look at. I mean, can we bring up the subway one, Deborah?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I have.
It just rotates, right? It might come up or not. Oh my God, there's one on the subway that's to die. I mean, I love them all, but I love that subway one.
Well, we'll have to do that on another day. Our guests are starting to arrive. I'm seeing the attendees show up on the control panel. So,
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
yeah,
Is that better?
So much better. Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah.
Yes.
But now you need to adjust your screen so that we can see your face, not just your vest. There you go. And Deborah, you want to make this into you want to go back to play from the start. So you're back in
yeah.
And I knew you knew that, but you knew that totally. You were on that. You were just going to do that in a second.
Yes, I'm just kind of keeping an eye on my main bottom screen because our second screen here over at WeWorks is not working. So I'm having to look at the bottom of my laptop every once in a while.
Now we see you perfectly, Teresa. That's so great.
Yeah, I was working on it.
Yes. And we see your beautiful background.
See? You can almost get all my action shots in.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies, the swearing has to stop now. Our guests are starting to arrive.
I don't know what you're beep talking about.
We behave.
Yes, always. So, Teresa, are you guys sold out yet for the luncheon?
For the dinner?
Yeah, for the dinner. What am I saying?
Yes, almost. Yeah. So we're, I just came from a seating meeting, so, everybody has to have the perfect seat. So
that's right. Yes, and you have to be careful about who is sitting next to whom.
Yes, it's a very special moment. Tess, I didn't want to plan my own wedding, so I said, as I said to a board member, the fact that I have to plan my own wedding every year for the rest of my life at Ms. is really painful.
I don't see you. You have enormous respect for event planners in times like this because one of my best friends is an event planner and she's into this kind of detail. It's the kind of stuff that drives me up the wall, but they totally get it and they do it as if, it's second nature to them. It's amazing.
Exactly. Makes me crazy, but they love it. All the more power to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Deborah, can I ask you a non event planning question?
Uh-huh.
So I thought at the end I thought at the end you could sort of lead some of the questionings, sort of what people want to ask. I can sort of lob it off to that, but in the slow prompts of nobody talks for a while,
Sure.
I'm hoping you jump in.
Yeah, not a problem. Although, from looking at the guest list, we have a pretty chatty group, so.
Yeah.
So I had one question. Maybe this is more for Deborah. I'm not sure, but we know that there's going to be a track at the conference related to some topics that would be consistent. Do we want to in any way preview anything about how this information would be shared at the conference, or is it too premature at this point?
Yeah, it's a little premature right now. We are going to be doing some stuff on. There is going to be a session on gender lens investing, but we're working out what that exactly is going to be.
Okay.
But we know from not only the excitement from this webinar, but questions that we're getting here at WFN. There was no question we were going to do something, so there will be a session in the fall.
So maybe there's if it feels appropriate, maybe in the conclusion, Deborah, we don't have to say specifically how it relates to this, but just that it's a topic that will continue to be part of the fabric of WFN.
Yeah. Let's see how we're doing. We're just at close to 9 o'clock right now. Nope, 2 minutes before.
And so how can you see the participants, Deborah? If I click on,
yes,
if I click on attendees.
Yeah.
I don't think she's let them in yet, Joy, and so we can't see them because she's the master.
Oh, got it. Will we be able to see that or no?
I can see the list of attendees.
Okay, but not us.
Hold on, let me pull down. Here we are. So.
Yeah, I can only see the panelists, isn't it?
Yeah, I can only see panelists too.
Oops, sorry about that. I see Candace is online. So Candace Elder of our staff is going to be live tweeting during the broadcast.
Oh, lovely.
And I forget, you're going to make the recording available, Deborah?
Yes. Right after this is done. It's recording now.
You're going to cut out the beginning babble that we do.
Yeah, it's recording now, and then we'll make the recording available, within a couple of days after this. Michaela will send that note out.
Great.
So we're right at 10 o'clock. We have about 13 of our participants on board, so let's wait another couple minutes or so before we get started.
And are you going to let them in, or are they not in yet, or?
According to my thing, they are in.
Do you think we should confirm, Deborah, ask someone to type a message, make sure they can hear us? Because it doesn't appear on our screens like they're in the loop yet.
I know what you mean, Liz.
Pardon me, Teresa?
Hmm?
That was just me saying, I know what you mean, that it's.
I think we might be in some sort of organizer panelist mode only.
Are you guys getting this email, this note back and forth from Candace?
Although I just saw that Candace wrote something to the entire audience.
Well,
Oh, I just got Skype back from somebody saying that she can see us.
okay.
So somebody who's on the call just wrote me in a different way to say that she can hear us.
And Liz, did you just get a private message from me?
I did. I was
Okay,
worried. I think it's working between us, but I'm not seeing the audience questions or the audience responses.
But they can, and apparently they can hear us. So,
well, that's good.
Oh.
That's certainly
Hey.
great.
so Deborah, should we get started? Deborah?
Hello?
Sorry, I was muted, everyone. Something else, so I apologize. So we're going to go ahead and get started because we want to be respectful of everyone's time. My name is Deborah Holmes. I'm the Chief Communications and Engagement Officer for the Women's Funding Network, and I want to welcome everybody to this call today of the Blueprint for Women's Funds on using finance as a tool for social change. We're so excited to join Criterion Institute and their unveiling of the Blueprint for Gender Lens Investing. Some of us know the work of Criterion. I, as having worked at Global Fund for Women, became familiar with the work a couple of years ago. And two of my colleagues are on the phone and helping to co-present today. So it's a really good tool that will provide the kinds of resources I think many of us have been asking in the movement to engage with and really shift some of the financial systems in ways that work for the change that we seek. What you're going to see today represents a partnership between the Criterion Institute, Ms. Foundation, and Global Fund for Women. And this is also supported by the Wallace Global Fund. So before we get started, and before I turn things over to our presenters, I do want to cover a few housekeeping pieces. You notice in your upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar control panel, you want to leave yourself on mute for the time being. It keeps down on the ground noise and also reverb, as we call it, so that we can minimize all of that. However, if questions do come up as the speakers are presenting, please do submit them in the chat box, which is in the lower half of your screen there, or you can raise your hand. I think Joy is going to want to probably go through the entire presentation first and then come back for questions, but we'll see how she wants to do that. Finally, you should also know that we're recording the webinar today, and this will make it available to you within a couple of days. Those of you who have been on WFN webinars before know we send a brief wrap-up of the key points in the meeting, as well as links to the PowerPoint and links to the recording of the webinar itself. A couple of things to keep in mind, because this is new work for many of us. I'd like you to be thinking about a couple of things, like what was it that made you decide you wanted to be on this call today, and what do you really want to learn from this? Or are you hoping to learn? And you can put your answers in the chat box, or we can have you raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and speak. I think that's all the top line things. Let me do a couple of brief introductions of our guest today. Joy Anderson is the founder of the Criterion Institute, and she's the primary author for the Blueprint for Gender Lens Investing. Criterion has a long history of working for women's funds and a long a relationship with Women's Funding Network in particular. She's a leader a national leader at the intersection of business and social change. Um, after, interestingly enough, Joy, I didn't even realize this about you. Uh, 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 you also co-founded Good Capital in 2006, which I think is quite interesting. You call yourself a serial entrepreneur and consummate networker, which I think everyone would agree. Your leadership and expertise have been at the forefront of the development of genderless investing over the last 8 years. Later, Joy is going to be joined in her presentation by Teresa Younger, who is president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation, and my former colleague at Global Fund for Women, Liz Schaffer, who is the chief operating officer. A couple of points about Teresa. She has been president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation, which is the oldest women's foundation in the U.S. since 2014. Under Teresa's leadership, the foundation launched My Feminism Is, a multimedia campaign sparking a national conversation on feminism, and funded a groundbreaking report on sexual abuse to prison pipeline, and joined Leading Women's Foundation at the White House to announce a $100 million funding commitment to create pathways to economic opportunity for low-income women and girls. She also led the campaign to hold the NFL accountable for violence against women. Liz Schaffer is a nonprofit leader, consultant, trainer, Renaissance woman, as I like to say, as well as author. Immediately before coming to the Global Fund, she was interim chief executive officer at Women's Funding Network. And I believe, Liz, you are also CFO at Women's Funding Network for
That
a
is
number
true.
of years as well. She's co-author of Financial Leadership for Nonprofit Executives, Guiding Your Organization to Long-Term Success. She's a very popular trainer at Compass Points workshops and conferences, and she lectures in the nonprofit financial management program at the University of San Francisco, Stanford, and UC Berkeley. So, Joy, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you and lead us through the blueprint for women's funds.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Deborah, and everyone else who's worked so hard to put this webinar together. It's been a driving deadline for us to actually finish this work that Teresa and Liz and I have been working on for a year. And so thank you for a deadline. And I think we are so proud to be launching this with Women's Funding Network. It couldn't be a more appropriate place to launch it. So I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly. I would love for people to make use of the chat box questions and shoot us questions that you want us to be addressing as we go through this. And we will leave some time at the end for sure for questions. Why don't I start out with why we did this and why a blueprint now? And the fundamental piece is in the conversations about gender lens investing, or how we can think about moving money to investments that have a gender lens. I've been working in that space for about 10 years now. And I think myself and many of my colleagues were still just scratching at, but what's the end social change that comes out of this? And how do we change the conversation from how do we move money with a gender lens to a conversation about how do we intentionally use finance to create social change, which is, I think, why we're all in this. And it takes, it's in some ways, it's the flip side of the same question. One of the ways that you create social change is by moving capital. But it's not the only way. And so the point of the blueprint and was really to have the three of us just wanted to sit down and kind of wrestle this to the ground and say, is there a way that we could make sense of this in such a way that other people could participate? Teresa, do you want to pile on that, and then Liz?
Yeah. So, one of the things I will say, coming into the work with the Ms. Foundation for Women, I had really not a lot of background in an understanding of the power, clout, and influence that the women's funding community as a whole had. And so when we started talking about this, I became very excited about the idea of creating a starting point, a place for us to engage in conversation, because I think it was happening, but we just weren't on the same page, and recognizing the the power and I would say respectability that comes from the work that all of us are doing. And, you know, after I read, and some of you may have read it, the previous report put out by Criterion, State of the Field, you know, I had an opportunity to sit down with Joy and start a conversation. And she looked at me and said, you know who else needs to be in on this conversation is Liz. Liz has got to come in on this conversation. And as we started just asking ourselves and each other questions about, you know, what would it look like if everybody understood the work that we wanted to do from all of the areas was about social change, and how do we do that best? We just started brainstorming. And so this is a really exciting opportunity to, what we hope to do is make this as easy as possible as a step one to get as many women's funds into a conversation in this field as possible. Liz?
Thank you, Teresa. So, I mean, obviously what you guys have already said would be a lot of what I would have said. I'll just add that, you know, one of the places for Global Fund for Women that this has been very interesting to us is that because we fund projects around the globe, we often have questions about, do we know of places to use finance for social change outside of the grant making context? Do we know of investable projects? And so what you'll be hearing about later in this webinar is that was one of the things that we studied as part of this, and that we want to share with our sister organizations, that in fact there were a few projects that we found that could absorb investment capital, which was the hypothesis we had, and it's nice to have proven it.
Cool. So we'll transition what you've got, and Candace just posted where you can find the blueprint. I think an email also went out from Women's Funding Network so that you can actually locate criterioninstitute.org/blueprint. Will get you to a page that can get you this. I think Liz, at some point you said alarmingly long document. It ended up being pages. But, you know, we wanted to say what we thought, and so hopefully we didn't waste a ton of words, but there are some pretty pictures in there. So let's just say that it's the fluff that makes it 50 pages. But feel free to download that. What we're going to really walk through is sort of the high level thoughts behind it, and do that fairly quickly so that hopefully in about 25 minutes, we can get to a conversation with you. So the overall framework, and Deborah, if you can move to the next slide, is the way that we organized this was we really stuck. Roz, who I hope is on this call, we sort of had, Roz Dawson and I had several conversations about actually staying committed to the framework, to the language of a blueprint. So we went all the way. We thought we'd actually have building materials and floor plans and the dimensions and the buildings. But what we're really talking about here is, what are the building materials that are put together that women's funds already have, that come together to create strategies, and those strategies have particular details and dimensions that help them make sense. Those individual strategies, I have always admired in the 15 years or so that I've been paying particular attention to women's funds, is that, you know, it's not just the individual strategies done by an organization because they execute a really great women's leadership program. You know, it's about how that fits together in a movement with a set of other strategies. And that's what we really mean by the sort of building to, or putting together a comprehensive change strategy. But we get all the way from the building blocks that you come with to the comprehensive strategy that you're about to launch. And then there's and then how do you get started? Because fairly quickly it can look like a kind of big effort, but offering, what are the doors in? What are the ways to get started? And then what's the neighborhood in which this is happening, otherwise known more broadly as the field of gender lens investing. But this report really isn't about the field of gender lens investing. Again, if you want to read that report, Teresa mentioned it. We wrote this report to be about women's funds and ways in which they could participate in using finance as a tool for social change. If you go to the next slide, Deborah, where Teresa's going to get started is looking at the building materials and what building materials funds have. And then Deborah, just one more, and then we'll let Teresa sort of tee that off.
Great, thank you. So, one of the things we started talking about early on was what do we already have and what do we already do in terms of building materials and what do we need to have? And, one of the key parts of our conversation was really recognizing that what women's foundations and funds bring to the conversation is specifically a gendered approach to what we are doing and a level of power and influence in how we do that. And so we identified basically 6 different building materials, as we call them, 6 different things that we think you need to have or that you probably already have that make it really special. I'm going to you see the 6 of them listed in front of you: leadership and voice, data and knowledge, capital or the ability to influence capital, organizational structures and processes, networks and trusted relationships, and existing program and social change strategies. I'm not going to talk through all 6 of them, but we do have them listed in the document that has been shared with you in more detail to just really break down what we're talking about and what we're thinking about. I think people instantly think when we say assets, people jump right into the idea that, our fund doesn't have a lot of money, and that's the place that's going to have the greatest impact is, how do we invest our endowment in, making the change that we needed to have. And so we wanted to take a step back because, what women's funds carry with them is far greater and far different. And because many of us organizationally have been in this field for a really long time, at least our organizations and institutions have been, we know that we hold legacy in a lot of different places. So I wanted to just really quickly spotlight a couple of what I considered, can you go back? Spotlight a couple of different areas that I think are really important. One was around leadership and voice, and the other one that I desperately love is around data and knowledge. And so I just want to take just a moment to kind of dig a little deeper into those 2 areas, because I think people sometimes forget the power and clout and what I call overall influence that women's foundations bring to the table. Women's foundations within their communities, in and of themselves, hold a level of expertise that can really be leveraged to get a conversation going and to lead a conversation that's actually centered in nothing greater than how we can influence the community and build in the community itself. And part of that is because we, as funding sources, have identified leadership within our communities and have identified leadership on our boards. And so we know who those leadership players are and what kind of activities and voice they bring to the table. And so we do it in many ways. Many of us are doing it in a variety of ways of how we put our leadership and leverage voice. We might be doing webinars with communities about what our grantee partners want or need. We might even be hosting a conversation about gender lens investing in some ways, what our own investment strategies are as we're talking to our donors is another way of leveraging our leadership as we move forward. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that this wouldn't be something new. This is actually something we're already doing. And if we wanted to be more intentional about it, we could do that. We could really look at how do we influence a variety of different places. So our grantees might be doing work in the policy area. We might be doing work with our banks, our local banks, to look at a variety of different places. So we can host those conversations as women's funds, and we're already hosting those conversations. Additionally, if we are not asking as women's funds, led by women, centering the conversations about women, then nobody's really thinking about it. And, it is okay to come from that perspective of how we want to drive and ask questions. And, women's foundations across the board are coming to the table as somebody people want to hear from because of our level of expertise and because we do and have done really well at how we manage dollars. And so we are a trusted member within many of the communities that we are in. And one of the things we should note is the finance field actually wants people that they can trust. They want to look at long-term track records for what's going on. And this also gives us a space and a place to build relationships where they might not be. Many of us are familiar that there are very few women in the finance fields. And so if we can connect with those women in those fields, we actually give them a safe space and harbor to leverage their expertise and teach us and be able to amplify and elevate their skill sets to the rest of the external communities that we might be working with. And so that leadership level, I think, is really important, and how we use our voice to engage people, to ask the questions, to bring expertise to the table is really important. And so I want to put that out there as one of those kind of building material areas that we might not have been thinking about as a place where women's funds can have a real space within the finance fields. The other area that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joy.
Oh no, I was about to say before we have to keep moving, but I wanted to make sure you talked about data and knowledge, which is where we're
going there. Yes. And the other area which I really love, and I think many of you who are on this webinar today have spent time doing, is what makes the women's funding community and many of the things that we do so important is that we are a hub of knowledge and data. And I bet you if we asked how many of you had funded a report in the past 2 years, most of you would raise your hands. You either did it yourself or you funded a report that talks about information in your communities, in your states. And you know, I know when I was in the public policy sector, those reports, that access to information was critical to us doing any of the work that we wanted to do. And so the fact that women's foundations are funding reports and doing reports specifically with a gendered lens on them means that we have resources in that knowledge, in that data to share with the finance field. And it's coming from us as a trusted source. It's coming from you know, really the ideas is how do we hold this information and how do we share it? So we need to actually remember that when we are doing our when we're looking to do research, when we've collected reports from other places, that we can share them with the finance field very intentionally to inform them about what's really happening in their communities. Finance functions on data. And so the more data we can get to them and in front of them that tells the story and the narrative and gives real hardcore facts actually helps leverage our own leadership in what we can offer them, right? Because then it becomes a partnership. They have our data. We can show them how we got to that data. We can introduce them to other experts in the field who may have generated that data. We can give them examples of that, and that's really important. And then we know, because all of us are talking on this, we have a level of knowledge ourselves about the importance of having a gendered perspective and a gender lens on the work that we're doing. So I think, go ahead.
Well, what we tried to do during the course of the blueprint and trying to quickly reinvent for you here on this webinar is the kinds of building materials, the assets that women's funds have influence and power within systems of finance. The question is, how do we leverage them? And that requires putting together a strategy, right? Having an intentional approach to translating the knowledge and the data that is available out there, or the leadership or the structures that you have, and translating those building materials into strategies. So I'll jump to the next one if that's okay with you, Teresa.
Yeah, I just wanted to say just one thing more as we move into strategies. But what we really believe is that you are all, as you read through the document, you will find that you are doing all of these, you are covered in all of these areas. None of this will be new to you. You may not have thought about how you might apply it to the relationships you want to develop or in the finance field. So I would go ahead on to strategies.
Cool. Well, and again, what we're building, the point of all of this, right, is that finance is actually one of the most powerful systems on the planet. It defines possibilities for so many people. It shapes what we, how we, one of its most critical functions is it defines for many people what value is, what financial value is, what things are worth. And in some ways that's incredibly alarming. But in other ways, it's a step, it's a, you know, in the same way that governments set policies, if finance sets so many of the ways that value is calculated within our world, well, we should be showing up and shaping that. And so, Debbie, if we move on, we've named 5 strategies. And again, this is getting to, just like all of you do, how do you design a social change strategy? It's not just a single shot to say, it's a good thing. It's a great thing if you channel your resources. It's a great thing to channel resources to investment, to enterprises or investment opportunities that have a gender lens, you know, to find one of the delightful gender lens investment products that are out there and move your endowment. But as Teresa mentioned, that's just a fraction of your power. And so I want to build on Teresa's point about data. And part of the strategy is figuring out how to take the data that you have that is about a gendered reality in the world, that is more nuanced, more sophisticated, that actually both points to the ways things evolved in the past, but also points to a future, and to use that data and influence finance. The strategy, the way we name it here, is really about advocating for a gender analysis in finance and thinking about all of the different points in which financial systems, capital markets, investment firms, pension funds, all the people who on a day-to-day basis are putting out capital, recognizing that if they were smarter about finance, we could potentially move them towards better outcomes. Just a quick example, I was at Future Without Violence a couple days ago and sat with Esther Solar and was just blown away by the breadth and richness of the data that she has about domestic violence and violence more broadly. And thinking about investment funds that I know who are increasingly aware that violence against women, frankly, like climate change, like these violence against women is a massive part of the experience of being human, tragically. And therefore, it's part of our experience as economic beings. The question is, how do we use the data to inform the decisions that are being made in finance? Finance looks back to the past to try to, this is kind of very simple definition of what it does all day, but people in finance, particularly analysts, they look to the past to see what's happened before. Then they look out to the future to try to create a different picture of what the future could look like. And then they discount back to the present. There's a lot of people who didn't think that the pent up frustration with sexual harassment in the workplace was getting to a breaking point. And if you read that future wrong and you say, no, people don't like it, but they don't really mind it and nobody's ever going to do anything about it, you can make a case to people in finance that says they're reading it wrong. Therefore, this is a risk that's even higher than we would have seen before. And the Bill O'Reilly decision last week was just, you know, made my heart sing many days as we're trying to figure out, is there this tipping point that we've now gotten towards so that the data about violence against women and how women are treated and becomes a more important force in how we value companies. So Teresa, you took that then, and there's other strategies. We sort of think through how to approach this, but you sort of took that and dove into your particular setting. So actually, if you can move forward twice there, Deborah, to the next one of looking at a little more detail, we wanted to figure out how do we actually ground this in what we would actually go do. So Teresa and Liz and I, in different configurations and with other partners, kind of tried a couple pilots to say, what would this actually look like? And so that we can share some of that learning. But Liz, do you want to dive into what y'all learned?
Absolutely. So, you know, the Global Fund for Women has a very robust database of applicants. We looked at 2,000, which is only a small portion of our applicant base, only those that are in English and in French. We did not yet look at our Spanish, Arabic, and Russian applications. And we did a look just to see if we could find some applicants who referenced the ability, what appeared to be social entrepreneurship or investment as an opportunity for in their world. Now, keep in mind, this is not part of our application process. So if we were actually asking applicants about this, we might have a different outcome. But out of 2,000, we had about 165 that looked to be possible candidates. We did a survey of those. We followed up with about we had 135 responses. Not everybody responds. There were clearly some that we were wrong, that they were not using investment capital or they did not seem to understand investment capital. But we came up with a group of 16 that seemed to be extremely strong candidates, and we interviewed them. And we have come to 13 profiles of organizations that appear to be investment ready, which is very interesting when you consider that we have never asked about this or been in that position. So the next step for us as an organization is to decide what we want to do about that, right? Do we want to jump in with 2 feet and begin to have that as part of our application process? Do we want to find a partner who can we can refer these projects, I mean, these initial 13, and then whatever else would come up later. And how do we want to be in partnership? So who would we want to work with on the investment side? Obviously, there would be a tremendous values alignment that would be needed, but we're just really now in the place of learning that it was possible to do this even when we were not really set up for it. So we hope to do additional research and learn more, but that's kind of how far we've gotten so far.
And what are the next steps, Liz? What are you going to do now that you know that it's possible or maybe possible?
Actually, the leadership team, Global Fund leadership team, is meeting today at 12:30 Pacific to discuss this. This is how on the cusp we are of just they have not even had a conversation about it. So we're presenting some information from the research study about what possible next steps are, but basically those are do we want to change our application process to be able to obtain this information in a less intensive way, because it was rather an intensive research effort because we're not set up to do this. And then how do we want to go forward in this idea of how we would share these referrals, with whom would we share them, and how can we actually mobilize some resources for the groups that are on the ground, that are doing the have a rights-based approach and can use capital. Interestingly, you can imagine that in the initial population, not everybody has received a grant from the Global Fund, because this is our applicant base, not our grantees. But of the 13, about 80% of them are former grantees. So not only do they fit some of the investment criteria, we can vouch for them. And I think that is probably quite appealing to an investment partner.
Well, and I think it's just such a great, just diving in and doing an experiment to say, well, I don't know, are there investable companies within our grantee base? And could we be getting them additional kinds of capital that would be useful for them? And getting to the beginning of an answer. I've been talking to you about this for years, Liz. This is a really important thing, even just to get to the beginning of an answer.
Right. And then, of course, we want to figure out, how what we've learned can be shared with other women's funds that would be interested. Obviously, we have a different profile than some of the domestic women's funds, and we recognize that. But perhaps if we could get very clear on what would be the right questions to ask, how might a grant-making application process surface these opportunities, that for us is the next step. And of course, we would want to have that be a template and a tool for the entire women's funds community.
So, Deborah, if you want to go to the next one, the next slide in looking at this is how to move from the kind of widgets, right? You've got assets that you can come up with some strategies, but in the end, how does this actually come together to affect a set of issues? And so we looked at 3 briefly in the report, and these really are scenarios. They're not a plan that's in place that's being executed currently. It's a kind of model for how they could come together. But I want to look a little bit at the domestic violence piece, because there is, very, very briefly, because there are a few places where this is coming together. And what we're starting to see is coalitions of philanthropists, investors, women's funds kind of circling around an individual issue and saying, let's all take let's combine our strategies. So around domestic violence, Criterion happens to be working right now in the Pacific, and I'll actually be with a board member of the Global Fund in Fiji, right? So the networks show up. You got global women's funds show up everywhere, and actually partnering with the Australia Women's Donor Network to look at domestic violence in the Pacific, tied to some efforts. It's a program called Pacific Rise, and there's some significant efforts to support impact investors going into work in the Pacific to support businesses within the Pacific, but with a gender lens. And so we've been spending a lot of time figuring out the skill sets what are the skill sets that these intermediaries have to even go in and think about this. And then the project that we're doing in June is to sit with the women's rights groups working in Fiji, Vanuatu, and Samoa, who are on the ground working on these issues, and what would they need to understand about systems of finance to be able to be players in the conversation. So not just doing a training with them, but also doing a design session so that they can come up with some ideas, and then some matchmaking so that they know which intermediaries they can be working with. Paired with that is, sort of beginning to have conversations with people who have data, like Futures Without Violence and others. And then we have a sort of demonstration $10 million investment fund that a foundation has put on the table to say, we'd like to allocate this investment capital to put together a strategy. So the learning that can start happening across that collaboration is where I'm seeing the most exciting things happen. Well, period, for me. That's the most exciting thing I'm seeing happen at all. But it's also where we're going to actually get to real impact. So Teresa, though, how do we get started? What are your thoughts about how we enter in this conversation? And we just have about a minute or 2 more of points, and then we'll turn to you with questions. So be ready with questions, because we want to talk less.
Yes, yes. So, one of the things I think is really important is that you just have to start somewhere. And I think oftentimes women have, I know I do, we think we have to have all the answers before we even do anything. And one of the things that I think we need to think about is the question that we ask you all to think about, which is like, what brought you to the conversation today? And can you lean into conversations, even if you don't understand all the terminology or the complexities around it? So, one of our big recommendations in the paper is just, just start to listen, just start to try and lean into what's going on and get your hands on information like this paper and other pieces about what conversations are happening around gender lens investing. And then I would suggest that people become vulnerable, because it means you have to start asking questions about things you don't necessarily know about, but you're really interested in understanding or learning about. And many of us have a board member, a financial advisor, that we could just set up a couple of lunches a year and just let them know that you have interest and you just want to learn, and start testing and asking them at lunch, what does this mean? And what might happen with this? Or I saw X in the paper, how can I think about that? And invite people into a conversation that you don't have to be the expert on, but that you can be in learning with and about. And then, the other way I would suggest that people start is invite other people into this learning venture with you. Because I think, Liz has touched on this, right? If you don't just start asking the question with intention, you're never going to get the answer. And it's always going to feel scary. And there's so many other things on our plates. To be intentional about how we can interact with finance and bring our expertise to the table seems like, one more thing. It's a really easy way to start engaging funders, donors, grantee partners in an education and learning environment together. And those would be my kickoff suggestions, is just, start educating yourself in the process, and then bring people along and give people an opportunity, even make a commitment to yourself to engage people in conversation and identify 3 terms you don't know today that you'd like to know 6-8 months from now.
And Google them. So Liz, within that, do you want to set up a little bit of the broader framework of where this sits within gender lens investing? Because there are other people to play with. We can have friends.
Right. I mean, I think that probably is a whole other webinar. I mean, I think, and actually there have been other webinars WFN has done, right? But this is a large field. I think sometimes those of us in the women's philanthropy space and the women's funding space, don't always have all of the wide enough picture of that. But I do think, I was taking a look at this. I hadn't looked at that very cool landing page that we have at the Criterion website now for the blueprint. And it's actually got quite a lot of other resources there. So I think it's a really good place to learn about what else is happening. And I suspect that a lot of the folks that Teresa just mentioned as sort of the starting place people, I suspect that your investment advisors that are working with you on investment, or that are in your constituency or your stakeholders, are already getting questions about gender lens investing. So it's a wide and growing field. There's a lot of content out there, and I would say that sometimes we, as a women's funding movement, we distance ourselves a little bit from it because it's not necessarily politically aligned with us sometimes. But I think this is the moment to consider, and maybe you want to comment on that too, Teresa, from a political perspective. But I think that maybe we're hoping that this blueprint is a place where you can start to learn more about the overall field and how we can be a part of it.
Yeah, I would just throw in that we have to be a part of it. I don't know that it's an option moving forward for us to effectively do the work that we want to do as the women's funding community, the impact we want to have on broader philanthropy, if we are not owning this space, and if we are not at least engaging in the conversation, because they'll have the conversation without us, and they'll determine, oftentimes men will determine what is important, and we need to be part of that conversation and comfortable enough to be engaged in it.
Right. And hopefully this is meant to be some resources that from our collective experience, we could say, here's some things we've learned about actually strategically going about doing that versus feeling the mandate, but not knowing what to do next. Hence the blueprint. So with that, we should open up to some questions. We have about 15 minutes left. Deborah, can you remind us how this happens? Do people raise their hands and?
Yes, you'll need to unmute the little microphone. It should be reading orange right now up in your GoToWebinar control panel. Click that off and it should turn green, and then you can ask your question. And while people are getting settled, Joy and Teresa and Liz, one of the things I just kept thinking through this, and each of you touched on it in a way, is this question of an organization's, a fund's capacity to be able to get this going and off the ground. So we have a wide range of funds within the Women's Funding Network. Yeah. We have some with reasonably large staffs, comparably speaking, and then some with 3. So how does someone who's leading a very small women's fund with a very limited staff, how do you get started without it feeling like it's onerous?
Right. I'll just say, I think we wrote this with that in mind. I think obviously Teresa and Liz are aware, but I was very aware of sort of, this could be the one-person shop that's with 5 volunteers that's barely keeping their heads above the water, at which point the sort of section on getting started can be really, fairly simple. Have a couple lunches a year. But it really, in the end, what women's funds, in my outside perspective, do is collaboration. So figure out what some other people are doing that you could be part of, that says if you're in the middle of Idaho, You have data that's about Idaho from your grantees, and that data might be really important to share with a national conversation that you're hearing is emerging. And so we want it to be less about you have to jump in and build a whole new program and move all your capital, and rather to say, let's come up with some more discrete strategies that people could get started with, but get started with in a more collaborative approach.
And sometimes it's just as basic as asking a question, and that can be enough to start a conversation. And so, what we tried to do in this document was create a space that was not so onerous. There are not 6 pages of terminology in order to read the paper. It's actually really simply written, and because we recognize, all of us having spent time in the fields we're in, that nobody has the time to just carve out. And this is about building partnerships and collaborations.
Absolutely.
We have a question from one of the members who's asking, will you be creating a 5 to 10 page executive report that they can share with their finance committees and boards?
I would say right now, the preface and the introduction will serve as that for right now. It's actually not bad though. It works well. If you take the preface, it's kind of the point. And then if you add in the next section, it lays out the sort of our basic points in the rest of it. So the first 10 pages will serve as that for now.
Okay.
And we are in, just so that you know, we're in, Wallace is such a great funder, and they funded us to do the state of the field report. So they're aware. I think when we started this, we said this was definitely not going to be more than like a 5-page summary, and voila. So what they're thinking about doing, we're sort of talking to them and talking to some other folks about adapting this also for different audiences.
Okay.
To say, could we have a blueprint? We wanted to write a blueprint that was really for women's funds. But we probably, even for you to be able to work with your partners, it would be good to have a blueprint for international NGOs or a blueprint for grassroots organizations. And so that it's not just, it's a kind of an approach, but thinking through a range of different audiences. And within that, please, can you, whoever is asking that question, please let us know what continues to be helpful. If it turns out that the first 10 pages don't really work for that, tell me what you do want, because we want to continue to evolve this document and other documents like it to be useful.
And there's a good follow-up question here too, in how can I look at my grantee partners and consider doing loan guarantees? I mean, do you provide a guideline, for how I can look at my grantee partners and consider doing loan guarantees or direct loans to them for direct impact?
Yeah, partly Liz was looking at that in terms of what was possible for the Global Fund. And I think looking at the steps that the Global Fund took to even find out if that was a viable approach. Okay. Right. So,
yeah,
that's the first question.
Yeah, I think that for us, also, it's probably different for a domestic fund and for a global fund because of the complexities of loaning money. For us to do loan guarantees for our grantees in many places, right? So that would be more potentially a little different than if it was local. But our working hypothesis is that the financial transactions that are not grant making, we would prefer to do in partnership with someone who is expert at that. It's not that I would ever discourage anyone from considering doing a loan guarantee for their grantees. I'm not saying that. I just think that for me and for my experience so far with the research that we've done is that I want to find the right place for the Women's Fund to play. And there are a lot of emerging potential partners in the financial mechanism space. And my thought, as it stands now from having done the research, is that our role can be in identifying the projects as opposed to building additional financial infrastructure. In my experience, the financial infrastructure to do grant making is expensive and may not be applicable to all of the other kinds of investment capital. So my instinct is to partner. But I would be so excited to talk to whoever asked that question to see if if that other approach would also make sense. I'm just saying that for me, my hypothesis was that we would go in a different direction than that.
Thanks for that, Liz. And that question came from Allison Pyatt. She's the treasurer for the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. So, Allison, if you and Liz want to get together after the call, that would be great.
I would love that.
And Allison, did you have any follow-up questions to that? Did your question get answered? You can unmute yourself.
Well, while she unmuted. So I know Allison quite well. She's an amazing leader within the financial services world. And I think it's the range of options also.
Yeah.
Knowing Allison well, trying to name from the ability for a women's fund to go into the community and make direct loans, which can be easy. Most likely it's not if it's a sustained program. There's a set of infrastructure that needs to get set up, and there are people who can help you do that. Mm-hmm. But that is one piece of ways to have direct impact. Mm-hmm. How about where else can you actually advocate in the next time there's a municipal bond hearing? Mm-hmm. Sort of thinking about all of the other ways, even within your local community, that financial value is getting set. Financial players are doing their power thing. And what would it take for you to advocate to have a gender lens at the table? And some of that is about moving resources yourself directly. Most of the time, I believe the broader strategy is about influencing how other people move their capital. And I think it's just worth balancing those two, enough experiments to understand what it takes to actually move capital and see what kind of impact can be created from that. But then the powerful move is often really advocating and using leadership and voice and all the other assets that you have to be able to shift other people's practices.
Someone just raised their hand. Lisa? Oh, she just went off. Well, we have, Joy, about 4 minutes left. I don't see any other hands raised right now. I would like to ask Liz and Teresa, was there in this whole process any aha moment for you?
Well, I just want to be completely straightforward and say that I had no idea what the answer would be. I had this hypothesis that it was possible. I had people, coming to us and coming to our CEO saying, do you know projects that we could fund? I mean, people would be asking that question of us, but I didn't know that it was going to be possible. So the biggest aha moment was that the biggest aha moment was when I showed Joy the profiles of the projects we found. And she's like, yep, those are fundable.
Teresa, how about you? Was there an aha moment?
I think for us, we did a couple of different components. One was looking at some pension components, and the other was looking at how we would realign our investment dollars from our and putting and looking at RFPs and what the response was. I think how seriously the finance field came back to us with responses to the questions that we were asking. And my other aha was how hungry my board was to participate in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just aha because I just had no expectation on it. Mm-hmm. When I arrived, I asked a question, and it's really been fun just to see their excitement. And I think the other aha moment was, has been randomly saying, wouldn't it be great if, and having people like Joy and Liz, and even Roz Dawson go, oh my God, yes, and what about, and here's what I'm thinking about, and have you ever thought of this? And I think those relationships that get built by asking random questions are always aha moments, because that's how we're going to start really amplifying our own influence and leadership in this area as the women's funding community.
Joy, go ahead.
Oh, just to build on that quickly, I think one of the things that my nervousness in some ways about this as a publication is we're so early in this process and we need everything, right? We need the detailed plans. Thanks so much, Allison. The detailed plans for how to actually build a loan program. But we need all those tools, and a lot of them are actually already available. They can be adapted in different ways. But my ongoing sense is we need space for imagination. We need those exciting moments where we say, what if, not, wow, we can't.
Okay.
And sometimes we just need to be saying, what if, over some drinks at dinners, and not necessarily feel like the next day the what if has to turn into the now how. But it's really important to create that space for what could we do, what's possible, because there isn't enough. I mean, there's creativity in the systems of finance. I think we've all experienced what happens when a bunch of people get together and they're very creative about finance. And folks have been creative. It's our turn now to step in and say, we need to expand our imaginations about why and how the issues of women and girls matter so profoundly in this system, and what it will take to influence it.
And guys, we have a hand raised from Kate Wilson. Kate, you want to unmute yourself? Her hand is raised. I see your hand raised. Or do you want to type your answer in the chat box if you can't find your unmute button? I mean, type your question.
or answer. We'll take answers at this point.
Answers too.
Yeah, I'll go for anything. So what I think we've said before, and it's actually showing up right here on the screen for anybody who's looking at it. You got it. What's
got it? I have to make my screen go bigger here so I can see. So Kate says, you mentioned that Global Fund has identified investable organizations in your grantee base. I'm interested to know broadly, what kinds of issues are they working on, and what are you looking to invest in? Also, are there any working on domestic violence? And so really interested to know what kinds of activity you're looking to invest in.
So, primarily the grantees that we have in our database are ones that are working on violence, economic, political empowerment, sexual reproductive health and rights. What we found is that the investable aspect is not necessarily the same activity that we are making grants for.
I see.
So there's one that is doing a women-run hospitality house that could use investable capital. There are some that are involved with technology. One's involved with, we fund them to do some work with getting girls involved in STEM on the educational front, but what they want to do is a consulting practice for nonprofits in their community. So the investable projects are aligned to their other activities and will help further their rights-based work that we traditionally fund through philanthropic capital, but they are not necessarily the same things. I can't say that that would be true for everyone, and I don't know what else people are finding, but we're finding that these are linked, but not the same exact activity that we're traditionally using grants to support their work in. So we see it as augmenting and adding to the sustainability of these organizations so that they can do more mission core work, but we have not yet found strong examples where the direct mission work could be funded through investment capital.
Okay.
I don't know, Joy, maybe you can, in your and that's what we've found so far. And again, we're very early on. I also really want to say that I'm not certain that Global Fund is going to use investment cap, is going to go into the business of investing in these groups. I believe we are going to, if we proceed, which I'll know after the leadership team meets later, I think it would look like us being in partnership with folks that have access to investment capital so that we could refer strong projects. And we would be able to say, you have to do your own due diligence on the efficacy of an investment in this, but this is an important group who's changing the world and changing their community. And we feel so much strongly about that we give them grants. And we've done this due diligence, and here's everything we know about them for the last X number of years. But I feel like as I'm seeing this now, the investment capital is on the side of, right? They're both important, but they're not funding the exact same things. Joy, you want to add something?
No, I think you said it. You said it spot on. The domestic violence piece that we're doing in the U.S. is actually looking for investments, and in this case, it's not yet going into direct investments into companies, but to investment funds that are working on issues to alleviate the causes, some of the root causes of domestic violence. And so again, it's an issue of not the direct thing, but a strategy to get at the issue that looks more broadly. But Deborah, I realize we're way out of time.
Yes, I know. And we've got some really good questions. So guys, what I'm going to do is I am going to type up the rest of the questions that I see here, and Joy and Teresa and Liz, I'm going to send them to you, and I'll let you know where they came from so that we can get responses to those. This has been obviously for everybody a fascinating conversation. You should know that the conversation is going to continue at our Women Funded Conference this fall in September 6th through 8th, because we know it is more than a buzzword for those of us in the Women's Funds, but there will be a session during Women Funded 2017. So thank you all for participating. You'll see a follow-up email from us with the links to the presentation as well as to a recording. And as I said, because we have so many great questions waiting in the queue, I'm going to get them all written down and send them to Joy, Teresa, and Liz, and they can respond directly to you.
Could we maybe send the responses as part of that communication too, Deborah? Like if we could do it promptly, we can, I mean, the ones that seem very general or that are helpful to multiple people.
Sure.
I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, sure. And we usually try to get these out. Michael is going to send it out when she's flying back from Kenya actually today. So she's going to send the follow-up stuff out when she gets back. So you've got a little bit of time, but not too much.
We can handle it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.